about communication and culture collaboration. That's usually our theme, but this time we've got a kind of a special expertise into the sciences.
You know what? I'm excited about the sciences of it, but communication in my life has been so critical as a core belief in being good at it. I don't know that I am, but I certainly put an effort, not just from a business perspective, life perspective. As I think about communication, and your entire being, how you communicate with family members or your neighbors or your friends, as well as in the business place with colleagues, all of these things. And it takes different approaches for each of them.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that everyone notices is when someone's communication is just off, right? You're chatting, you're telling people about, oh, this is why you should work with us, or this, that, or the other, and it just feels like salesy, or it feels like they've made it awkward. No one likes that, and it does take work, and it does take intent to get an idea across in a way that makes the other person feel welcome and invited, and also get the point of what you're saying.
You know, you bring up a good point. The canned pitch, so to speak, right? It's the one that you've said a gazillion times over and over and over and over again. It just sounds canned. It doesn't sound authentic, genuine, or, all the things that build trust between you and whoever you're communicating. Whether that's a neighbor that you greet the same way every time, or greet every neighbor the same way, or whatever. But most importantly, in the organization, you are communicating with different levels of people. And, then you're trying to communicate with people outside the organization. And I agree with you. It sounds salesy when you're forcing a community truly thoughtful and
You ever worked like a retail job, or customer service sales, where you've got like two or three scripts they want you to, use, and you've done it so many times, someone walks in, you blurt out like a hybrid of two or three snippets of a thing, right? Like, hi, welcome in. How can I help you check out?
right, right, right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yes. And that's where I was going with that canned pitch, right?
Yeah. I don't think it's a good look for an organization.
Well, it's not. And I think people see right through it, first of all. And second of all, it's one of those immediate turn off. I don't want to listen to a canned reading from a script. That's no fun. Talking about whatever it is, whatever the topic is, if you're talking about it, maybe know it or ask good questions to learn it. Right?
I've worked with a lot of companies that are somewhat legacy. They've been in business 20, 30 years. And I notice a lot of those companies do phenomenally at building a natural conversation into kind of whatever they're doing. All the skeleton bones of, hey, this is how we help you, this is how we get started, are pretty formatted, right? Like they're easy to fit in when you've been doing it for a while. But you ask people about how their day is, you have a conversation, you hear about their kids, all kinds of things that really have nothing to do with the conversation task wise, but really enhance the actual relationship and the ability to get work done.
And I think that those types of organizations who do that are probably more successful.
Yeah, I think that's why they've been in business so long, is they've got some good culture that way.
One of the things that I think about from a is, especially when we talk about authentic, is how we communicate today and how technology fits into that. Talk about texting, emailing, any number of different device type chats or whatever the case is. of community. Um, and it's necessary. We need to do it. It's faster, more efficient.
Eat a light, right?
Yeah, right. But on the other hand, it opens doors to misinterpretation or not understanding tone or reading into it because you're having a bad day and they're not. Take something that could very well be meant genuinely nice to mean, oh my God, what are they saying? Right? And you get some really serious miscommunication. And I think technology lends itself to that. I think technology being necessary, we have to learn how to communicate better with the vehicles and
Yeah, I wonder what it is, in my non-expert frame of view, right? My non-academic frame of view that makes communication effective virtually. I mean, everyone has an experience and kind of their own opinions there. But maybe there's some things you can do organizationally or individually to make kind of this hybrid world we live in work well for in person and work well for text, mail, WhatsApp, Instagram.
one of the big questions we've got an expert on today, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to introduce him. But one of the things I want to know is how can communication woven into fabric, right? We talked about. You said the organizations, some of the organizations with have a better way of making it natural and authentic types of. But did they do that deliberately, or was that part of the culture as they built the organization? Is it something that they implemented? Those are things that I'd really like to hear about from Dr. Mike Alt,
Yeah.
who is an accomplished visionary academic leader with over 17 years of experience in higher education, academic administration, business consulting. And the guy does it all when it comes to communication, right? I mean, he's been featured in a National Geographic documentary, had textbooks reference his work. What a great guy. And if we could just bring Dr. Mike Alt up, that would be fantastic.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Alt,
Hello.
how are you today?
Hi. I'm great. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for joining us. Uh, as you heard, we all have questions, and I hope our audience has a ton of questions as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
some of the things that you were talking about, just I find those so fascinating when I with people and I tell them what I do. One of the things that they ask right off the bat is like, what are the magic words that I use as like a Jedi mind trick to get what I want from people? Like, my teenage kid won't tell me where they're going at night,
Oh
or
yeah.
like how do I manipulate them so that they'll give me what I want? And that's not that's not what communication is. It's not a Jedi mind trick. There's so much more to it about like the principles rather than the tips and tricks. And every time I see one of those books on like airport newsstands and stuff that's like the tips and tricks to get what you want through communication, I just cringe because it feels inauthentic, like what you're talking about, where it's like this canned script. And if you just say the right words, then magically you'll get everything you want. And unfortunately, we don't have those magic words. It
It's
takes
like
work to
crossing
build relationship.
neuroscience with communication, right?
Well,
And
like
the
in
Yes.
computer
synapses going.
code, and yeah,
Yeah, you can't hack people's minds and their a relationship like that.
it's not a punch card of I did these things and now I get what I want.
Yeah, exactly.
Go ahead,
Yeah.
John.
So you can't hack somebody's communication and just unlock it. right?
Yeah.
Good. That's good. But would it be great if you could in some ways? But on the other side of that, that is less authentic than just really truly asking good questions. You know, I think communication goes beyond words. Would you agree with that statement?
Absolutely. And so much of our community is nonverbal, and tend to trust nonverbal communication more than we trust the verbal communication.
Hmm.
If somebody says something like, "Yeah, I really like you a lot," we're going to be thinking to ourselves, "They obviously don't." Right? So it's not the words themselves. We're picking up on all of the other cues that are telling us what we should really take from that message, rather than just the words that somebody is saying.
Right, right. So at the end of a conversation, somebody says, "Have a great day." And depending on the smirk on their face or the smile or the straight lips or whatever that is, you're really going to be able to read into, do they really mean?
Yeah. And as human beings, the vast majority of us are really good guess detectors.
Yeah,
We know when somebody is trying to manipulate us, know when somebody is, not authentic, if they're, just trying to flatter us, although flattery tends to work whether or not we know that they're doing it or not. But you know, have this BS radar where even if the words are right, if the relationship, the tone, the background, the history isn't right, then that radar goes off in our heads, and we're like, nah, I don't trust this.
yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. I've been in the sales game for quite some time, and back in the day when telemarketing was bigger, and I had some reps that were business development reps. I would always tell them they can hear you. They'd look at me like I was crazy. No, it's true. Smile when you're talking on the phone. They they will accept what you're saying genuinely. And if
And there's a lot of research that backs that up.
absolutely, yeah,
So it's not just like a good habit to get into. There is there is lots of research that shows that even when people can't see us, we're impacted by our nonverbal communication.
how do you feel about so the communication between people who know each other better, they know each other well? Do you feel like there's more opportunity for misinterpretation talking about an email or a text or a chat than there is if you don't know somebody? Or would you say that it's equal?
I think that it depends on the type of relationship that if my wife sends me a text, I pretty much know what she means. Even if it's one word, or if it's, just kind of off the cuff and things are misspelled or whatever, like I know exactly what she means. And I interpret that message through the context of our relationship. If I don't know somebody, then I don't really have as much context to place that message. And so there is more uncertainty around, like, when we don't have an established relationship with somebody. It can be hard to understand, like, are they a sarcastic person? Are they manipulative? Are they just a straight shooter and they are saying exactly what they mean? I don't really know all of that yet, and so I'm feeling it out and trying to figure out, is this a genuine comment that I just take at face value, or is it something that I need to read into more? So I think it is easier for us if we have a lot of history and context with a person versus when they're just, you know, a salesperson that we walk into a store and we just start talking to them. We have no history with them. Um, we're a lot more wary of the way that they present, and there's a lot more opportunity for uncertainty.
Yeah, and I find that to be true as well. Now, let's go a step further with that. When we talk about knowing somebody and not knowing somebody, you're in an organization, tend to talk with people from different walks of life. Organizations are very diverse, and you've got somebody from a different country or a different language. And there's all sorts of cultural barriers within the workplace that are really unseen and unexpected. How do you recommend people become more aware and better that instance?
Yeah, there are so many different ways that diversity plays into groups and teams and organizations. You have age disparities where, if you're, my age or older, you grow up with all of this communication technology. Before the pod, we were just saying, 30 years ago, people wrote letters and they sent them through the mail. And now all of a sudden, you can talk to anybody in the world in a split second. And so that it, it presents these difficulties with like intergenerational communication, where you have younger people who are just digital natives have expectations around availability or
Uh,
when you're communicating. So does it matter? Oh, did I glitch?
you're
You
good.
glitched
You're
just a
good.
bit, but that's okay. You're back.
I'm sorry about that. But recognizing like what medium of communication seems most appropriate for the context. So is it okay to text message my boss at home, or should I use an email? Or there, like you brought up, there's these cultural differences that we need to navigate. Of if I'm in a more power distance where there feels like more power distance between the boss and the subordinate, then how does that impact my community? And even just basic things like time zones. Like if I'm working on a team and one person is in London and one person is in Los Angeles, how do we coordinate our timing? So that can present all kinds of challenges with developing rapport and strong communication practices. And it can be hard when you have remote groups, especially. But finding ways to connect outside of just the day-to-day task accomplishment is actually really important. So there's research on what we call multiplex networks and uniplex networks. So uniplex networks are when we only have like one touch point, only talk about work and, and task accomplishment. And if we don't have anything beyond that, then we're going to have very superficial interaction. But once we start adding additional layers and making these multiplex relationships where you talk about personal life and find out about how their kids are doing on their softball team, and you figure out that their mom is going through chemotherapy, and then we have these opportunities to connect on a much deeper level, um, rather than just the particular topic relationships. So even when we are remote and not it's impossible for us to get into the same place at the same time. Finding opportunities to give more depth and meaning to our relationship is going to strengthen the communication opportunities that we have.
But you mentioned a couple things. That is, when we look at us 30 years ago, sending exciting to get that letter, but it takes you another 30, 2 weeks to respond, right? On the other hand, in today's world, communication is immediate and it's across the globe. There, with that the case, you feel like the communication barrier between the older generation and the generation is real, and how do we overcome
Yeah, I definitely think it's real. And as you mentioned, with the increase in technology around communication, um, when things become more available, we feel that they have less value.
it?
When you got that letter in the mail from like a pen pal, and you opened it up, and there was like this was a precious thing to receive this communication message because it took so much labor to create and send and get to you. And now, as technology has made communication cheaper, I think that a lot of people, especially these digital natives, see it as a commodity that um, has very little value. Yeah, each message has extremely little value, and because it's just so abundant.
I
And
think
so,
about what it used to mean to have someone come and visit you from another state or country. But anymore, travel is so easy. Anymore, we keep in touch and across so many means. It's just kind of another hangout, right? It's a little bit scarcer of an occasion, but it's not necessarily so rare. It's what it used to mean.
yeah, and so if you've never gotten that pen pal letter, if you've never had the challenge of being face to face with somebody who's distant from you, um, I think it's easier to take for granted um, what communication is and what it means to people.
Mm,
And so when you have this digital divide in communication technology, recognizing that know if if you have older generation people, the way that they interact, it may not be as immediate. It may not be like they treat communication differently. And I'm painting with really broad strokes here. Like not everybody that's my age or older, sees communication as a very precious thing, and not all young people treat it more cavalierly. But kind of in general, yeah, like the way that people interact with and relate to communication and find value in it is different. And we see that change over time as the communication technology has made communication more abundant and easier to access. So, yeah, that can be a challenge finding how these two groups of people who have very different experiences with communication, how do you find that overlap where both sides feel comfortable with how things work? And that is a challenge. um, and
I
I think
can
the
only
first step.
imagine as you look at um, that challenge in itself, or teach or students um, about communication going into the work, and maybe in the graduate studies you don't have a lot of that in your curriculum, but on the other hand, getting these younger folks into the workplace as I have talked to executives, I know you talk to executives, there is a gap, and it's a real gap that is problematic in because of talking about here. How do we, as leadership, what's our best approach to close that gap? And as the ones entering the workforce, what can they do to help close? Work together.
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, so I get this question pretty regularly from organizational leaders and from my students, but on both on different sides of it. Organizational leaders are like, to what extent do I need to accommodate kids that are coming in, straight out of college, and they have these ideas about how working in corporate America and kind of communication expectations and stuff, how much do I accommodate them? And then for students, they're like, well, how much do I need to adapt my style, my communication to a workplace? And the answer, of course, as an academic, I can't give just, but it depends. In it depends on who needs whom more. So if you are an organization that is in desperate need of talent, then you need to accommodate the talent because they are a precious resource. And so you need to make sure that they feel comfortable. If talent is abundant,
Mhm.
then there's less pressure on the organization to accommodate newcomers, and so then it becomes incumbent on the newcomer to adapt their style, their communication expectations to the organization. So it's not this like, well, this is just how it is. It's, well, what are the pressures that different groups of people are facing and experiencing, and how does that influence and incentivize a different style of communication? And sometimes I see that um, will go too far one way or the other, where either they treat their newcomers like garbage, and they're like, we're cheap and easy to replace, and that message gets communicated. And I mean, we saw this right after COVID, where couldn't find anybody to work,
Right.
and wages just skyrocketed all of a sudden because we couldn't find anybody to work. And then things changed very rapidly. And so have this where like my recommendation is be a good person, regardless of what the pressures are.
What, it's
And
simple, right?
yeah, because those pressures are likely to change.
Hmm.
And if you've established a pattern of treating people poorly and like just expecting them to make all of the accommodation, there will come a time when their labor is in higher demand and they will have no reason to stay with you.
Mm.
And so I think that it's incumbent on organizational leaders to communicate, find out how people like to communicate, and then find ways to accommodate as best you can to those expectations. Now, you don't have to personalize everything, but finding ways to let people know that you're trying. Like, you've ever learned a foreign language and you suck at it, which I have done, people appreciate that you try.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And to go a little bit deeper into what you simply said was being that means different things to different people, right?
Mhm.
But on the other hand, it lends the question of how, as a leader, can I adjust and um, how do I learn to care more, right? Because
That's a good question.
you know I have to care in order to bring awareness at first, right? If I'm not aware and I don't care, That's where the bad apple leadership comes from.
Absolutely. Yeah, the in order to be a good leader, you have to be open-minded and willing to engage in critical self-reflection.
Mm.
Because if I don't care, then I'm not going to treat people well. And I'm not going to, put in the effort to build relationships will that will be beneficial and helpful to me and to the organization in general. And I see this regularly that people are like, in leadership positions, they're like, well, I don't really need to care. And it's like, maybe you don't. Maybe you're in an industry that is just so insulated from any economic downturns that you're going to make money no matter what. But is that the kind of organization that you want?
The
Sure.
life you
And
want to
you can,
lead, right?
yeah, and you can't even appeal to people's bottom line. Like it's expensive to replace people,
Yeah.
Very much.
and if you treat people badly, if you're not willing to look at yourself and say like, how can I improve my communication skills? How can I treat people better? How can I communicate more effectively and kind of put the onus on myself in terms of how to create messaging that is clear, understandable, meets people where they are, that creates this relationship of trust. Um, if I do that, if I care about that, then I'm going to be much more effective in getting things done, right? I'll have fewer conversations where I have to clarify my expectation. I'll have fewer people that turn over. And then I have to bring in new people and train them. Like even just the logistics of it, only care about money and hassle, then you should care about good communication. Because good communication lowers hassle and it lowers costs and turnover and wasted trying to explain yourself over and over and over again. So, in and it is just good practice to be a good person. So there are so many layers of why good, effective communication should be something that all leaders should be focused on. You should be reading books about effective communication by reputable people. You should be doing seminars. You should be doing a master's degree in communication or finding ways to learn how to be a better communicator impacts so many layers of the organization that even if you're not a good person, you should be incentivized to be a better communicator.
Sure. Absolutely. And even though you may be a good communicator, does that naturally come to make you a good person? Or as somebody who is a good communicator, can I also have ulterior motives for
That's
There are lots of good communicators who are horrible people.
yeah.
true.
So they're not one to one.
No, no. I mean, think about like some of the worst people who have ever existed on Earth were fabulous communicators. So there is a question of ethics there. I could be a good communicator, the way to get you to do what I want. But
Kind of like
it
earlier.
is in what I'm sorry, go ahead,
Kind
Jake.
of like earlier, right? We talked a little bit about that, I think, on our pre-conversation. Go ahead.
Yeah. Just because I can get you to do what I want doesn't mean I should get you to do what I want. If I can get you to do something that's in my best interest, but not in your best interest, then that's kind of my definition, my working definition of unethical, right? So
Absolutely.
just just getting effective, more effective at your communication doesn't necessarily make you a good person, and it doesn't necessarily make it so that you're treating people right and you're operating ethically and morally. Those are two things that should go together but don't necessarily.
Right, right. I totally agree with that. And as I think about communication and getting better at communication, I think that part of that is that from a leadership perspective, we need to be learning about how to be a better person. I may be a good person today, but how do I get better at being and improving my life and my communication with those around me and community and all of these things that help cohesion amongst not only an organization but anybody that I might talk with, whether it be or a family member or whoever.
Yeah, there's a fantastic couple of books by a researcher at Stanford, Robert Sutton, and one of them is called the No Asshole Rule, and the other one is called the Asshole Survival Guide, and there it goes to that point exactly that people can be very effective communicators. People can be very good at their job and competent, but is it worth putting up with if they're an asshole? And sorry if you use, I don't know
You're fine.
Oh, you're fine. Absolutely.
but he also differentiates between a temporary asshole, which all of us are at some points, right? Are having a bad day and just say something that's just as you're having a bad day. And then he talks about people where this is like a chronic condition that they are just a
Yeah.
certified asshole all around. And in those circumstances, if somebody's a temporary asshole, we can make accommodation for that. And, they shouldn't act that way, but we should give them some leniency because all of us experience bad days. But if it's a chronic situation, then we need to find out how to either remove ourselves from the position or find out if we have some power or authority, can we remove that person from the situation? um, how do we document things appropriately? How do we engage with these people if we just absolutely have to? So there's a lot of skills here, and we need to, in terms of dealing with people who are not only like mean spirited, but ineffective communicators who are good people but say the wrong things over and over again, right? How do we coach them on how to treat us and how to communicate with us? Um, how do we find out how we are best communicated with? And then extend that to other people, finding out how they best are communicated with, and then adapt our communication to them. So really, we have to care about people and their well-being. Um, just a demagogue or a Machiavellian, where I'm going to use my communication to manipulate other people to get what I want. That's that's one way of being effective at communication. But recognizing that the other person is a human being with feelings and emotions and goals, just like I have, and then trying to figure out how I can my communication to lift them up or to explain things clearly for them, um, so that they can achieve their potential and do better at
Mhm.
what they're doing. That's when I use the term like effective communication, that's more what I'm meaning, where I'm thinking about the well being of the other person that's receiving my messages and that we're having this interaction rather than just how do I get them to do what I want.
Sure. So what I'm hearing is that an emotional IQ is necessary, not only to be a good person, but also to be a good communicator within that non Machiavellian.
Yeah, definitely. The emotional intelligence, um, we have varying degrees of it, and some people are not great communicators, not because they have ill intent, but because they don't have the skills. And this is something that I teach in my classes over and over again. Good communication is a skill, just like playing basketball or swimming or whatever. And some people are really naturally gifted, have natural things that make them better at it. LeBron James is 6'9" and 300
Yeah.
pounds and can jump like a gazelle. Like I am just never going to be like, no matter how much I practice and study, I'm never going to be like that. And that's okay. But with with the limitations that I have, I can still be a good basketball player. I'm not going to swim like Michael Phelps, but I can be a good swimmer through practice and learning and study and just putting some effort in. And so I think a lot of people have this idea that the communicator is something that either you have or you don't. That you're
Gift
either
of
born,
gab, right? The give he's
yeah,
got
you're
the
just
or she's
born.
got the gift of gab.
And the truth is that there's some truth to that. Some people do have natural tendencies that make them better or worse, but the majority of somebody's ability, whether it's in basketball or swimming or community, the majority of it is through deliberate practice. It's through putting yourself in positions, being aware of what you're doing, and not just mindlessly going through the routine of it, but thinking, how can I do better at this?
Yeah.
Is there a way that I can connect better so when I'm giving hard feedback to a subordinate, they take it better and they don't get defensive?
Right.
Now, how do I practice that? So and not put it onto the other person like, well, you're just bad at receiving feedback.
Right.
No, maybe, but maybe I could be better at giving feedback.
Yeah.
So it's that skill set that's developed.
So just so I understand, what you're saying is to be less intentional and more automatic in how you can people to keep up with the world we're in, right?
Yeah, just don't ever think. Have things just spew out of your mouth
Uh-huh.
with no regard. That's the main takeaway. Jake. I'm glad that you're following along.
Good. Yeah.
So, one of the things that I've always believed, in order to be a good communicator, you also have to be. And when I talk about listening, I talk about it from hearing and listening, which are two different things in my mind. Would you agree that you need that hearing and listening skill set? It is a skill set, in order to be a good communicator.
100%. Yeah. When I'm doing consulting work and working with a company, my first stage is I don't want to say anything. I want to listen and figure out what people in that organization are saying. Where are their pain points? What do they complain about? What do they say that they do well? What are they happy about when they come to work? All of those things are going to help me understand them so much better and then help them cultivate a culture that maximizes the things that they're doing well and minimizes the things that cause pain. And you don't know that unless you are willing to sit down and listen to people and just observe and see how they interact with each other. And that whether you're dealing with an organization or you're dealing with your 16-year-old kid, that skill set of like, I should listen first and then respond versus I have all the answers. Let me just descend from on high and bestow this knowledge upon you. Nobody likes that.
Nor does it
And
work.
no, it doesn't. And 90% of the time, you don't know what they're going through
Right.
because you haven't listened to them.
Right.
So I we have a class in our master's program that's about listening and interviewing. And even the onboarding process. Like, how do I know that this person's going to fit with our culture?
Sure.
And a lot of that is about the listening skills and trying to into their life and their expectations. Only do that through listening.
So one of the topics that we had a couple weeks talking about culture, one of the questions that I had was wrapped around, you know, how do you create, how do you manufacture culture? Right? I'm going to get me some culture. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to
Yeah.
go out, I'm going to lift it off a shelf, and I'm going to buy it, and I'm going to implement it. That's what I'm doing.
Well,
I don't, and I asked the question earlier, how do we weave communication into the fabric of an organizational? But
great question.
that alone is saying that there is a culture there, and there always is, right? It's now,
Exactly. Yeah. That was going to be my first point is that you can't not have a culture.
right?
Every organization has a culture. Some people just let a culture happen, and some people mindfully implement a culture based
Mm.
on their goals and what they want to see out of their organization. And by far, the latter are more happy with how their culture evolves.
Sure.
Now, there's occasionally there are those people that just fall ass backward into a good culture, but that's rare. So if you want to mindfully create a culture that is positive and effective and that people want to be in, I just had a conversation with a company that they were having trouble with turnover, and they're like, well, we raised our starting wage, and then the company next door puts a sign out that they're $19 an hour, and we're at $18 an hour, and then we have to go to $20 an hour, and we just have these workers that just kind of go through all the different companies that are on the block, and they're like, how do we keep people here and make them want to be here versus just going wherever the wage is higher? And another person that was in this conversation was like, "Oh yeah, we struggle with this too." Realized that millennials want, things like ping pong tables and beanbag chairs. It was like, you're not gonna fix your culture with ping pong tables and beanbag chairs.
No.
You need to get people connected with the purpose of the organization. And the organization that I was working with had a fantastic draw. I mean, they were involved in manufacturing things that go on like airplanes for the Department of Defense. And
Wow.
you're like, how awesome is this? Take them to the museum and and show them the plane that their part goes into and show them what their work does. Introduce them to a pilot
Yeah.
that flies that plane and show them what their work means to that pilot and accomplishing that person and keeping them safe. And it was this like, oh, yeah, culture is not about having video games or ping pong tables. It's about having this unified connection with the purpose of what we're doing. And the more that you can create this shared values, the more people are going to be connected and understand the culture. And people connect in that way when they feel safe. And the research around teams and organizations is really clear that the number one predictor of of a team working well is the level of psychological safety that the workers experience.
Mhm.
So, how safe am I to put forward an idea that may be half baked and might really suck? Are people going to tell me that I'm stupid?
Oh, yeah.
And
Versus
can
that's
I
a great
take a
idea.
risk?
Have you thought through this, this, or this?
Yeah, and it might be a terrible idea. That's fine. Terrible ideas are a great starting point.
Absolutely.
But am I going to be ridiculed for
Right.
it? And so establishing that a culture of psychological safety means that we have to start with ourselves as the leader.
Right.
Like, can I be honest about things that I mess up? Can I talk about times when I up but learn something valuable from it? Can I make allowances and make sure that the people on my team know that they also can make mistakes and learn from it and it won't be held against them? And sometimes as a leader, it can be hard because people have come from other organizations that maybe had very low psychological safety and it was dangerous to speak up.
Sure.
And so you need to build that trust with them that, you know, here it's different. Here you can try something new and it won't be held against you.
So
And
as a leader, you can't be the guy who says I have an open door, or the gal, I have an open door policy. Now get out. Slam.
yeah, how dare you walk through my open door?
Well, so question on that. I mean, obviously, you have to make tough calls sometimes on a project, and there is objective. We need to come to this point, right? Especially if
Yeah.
like you're a very task oriented or action quickly. Uh, how do you go about managing that when knowing you have to provide feedback and be critical, and people may take the feedback harder than it's planned on being received, right? I mean, that's a difficult thing to
Absolutely.
balance.
It is. It's very difficult. Something that's really important is recognize that making a psychologically safe environment not the same as pulling punches and sacrificing productivity for everybody feeling like it's sunshine and rainbows all the time.
Mm,
Psychological safety also includes I feel safe enough to give you really hard feedback and recognize that you're strong enough and that you have enough safety to take that feedback and implement it well. In psychologically safe environments, they tend to be more productive rather than less productive because are comfortable telling somebody when they're not meeting expectations. Very often as a leader, and I've experienced this several times when I kind of chicken out telling somebody what they really need to hear
mm.
because I'm worried that they're that they're going to take it the wrong way or that they're going to get mad at me or they're going to turn it around and be like, well, it's your fault that I'm not meeting expectations.
Oh,
That is a signal that there is not psychological safety because I don't trust you to take the feedback well as it's intended, and you don't trust me to give you the feedback that I think will improve your performance and make you more effective and impactful in our organization. So that is a signal. Like if I'm pulling punches, if I'm not holding people accountable, it's because I don't feel safe. And it probably signals that my workers on my team also don't feel safe.
okay.
So that's where like, okay, now I have to look at myself in the mirror very critically, be like, what do I need to change to make my team trust me more so that I can give that feedback and hold people accountable.
If you don't mind me being a little more specific,
Sure.
just to narrow in there, let's say someone comes from, like you're talking about, an organization where they don't have that safety, but they're coming on to a team who maybe does. How do you help that person feel safe while also providing feedback? Because I think you're right. If you're getting that feedback, you're not. If someone comes from another organization, they don't have that safety, but they're top talent. What are some things you can maybe do to build that?
Yeah, perfect question. Um, it's a lot of it is about modeling. So people are going to be aware of other people taking risks, and then they will be watching very carefully what the consequences are of that person taking a risk. So if somebody in a meeting says, I know that all of us are really excited about this, but I have this concern that this isn't going to work. And here are my concerns. And everybody's like, why are you so negative about this? It signals to that newcomer, it's not safe here. Don't put your honest opinion out there. Just go along with the crowd. But if that person steps forward and gives that critical review, like, I don't think this is going to work the way that we want it to work. And here are some things, right? And that person is rewarded. Not necessarily like, here's a gift card, but people at the table are like, that's a really good point. I hadn't thought of that. Let's work through this. And it shows that they're taking that person seriously and they want the best outcome. And they're like, thank you for bringing this up because wouldn't have thought about this and it would have had a worse outcome. Now that person sitting at the table that's new, that is afraid of speaking up, just saw that speaking up is rewarded and people care about what you say. And it might take a long time. One meeting where that's rewarded is it may not do it, right? It might something that you build up over time. They say that trust takes a long time to build and almost no time at all to destroy.
Yeah.
So
No, yes.
like one meeting where somebody says a sarcastic remark about somebody else and set back the development of that trust. And so, like, be aware if there is that negative comment, as a leader stepping in and saying, no, you don't need to talk like that. I think this is a valid point that we really need to consider. Like that redirection now signals to everybody else being the person that has a cutting remark, that's what is not allowed. That is what is going to get you on the crap list,
Yeah,
right?
sure.
The person that's taking the risk is the person who will be protected and will be supported and will be rewarded. And very quickly, people respond to incentives, whether those are social incentives or monetary incentives or promotions, or like they are very aware of when and how people are being rewarded on their team. And if you make it very clear that the behaviors that we want, which is you feeling safe, you being able to put your ideas out there, those are rewarded and protected. And being a jerk, being sarcastic, putting other people down, that's going to harm you. Then people very quickly realign their expectation.
What a fantastic. It's clear to me, what's really clear to me, this is that we should have scheduled a hell of a lot longer to have this conversation as I am so intrigued by your responses to the question. And you know what? I really appreciate the fact that it open dialogue and thank you for your responses. We are up on time. However, I wanted to extend an offer to anybody out in the audience if you'd like to ask any questions to raise their hand because this can go on. I'm certain, Mike, as long as we've known each other, that this could go on for a very long time.
Yeah, we never go under time, do we, John?
No. If you do want to ask a question, feel free to hit the hand at the bottom of your blue bar over to the left. There's the icon. Sydney. Hey,
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Alt. This was really, really helpful. I just had one question. I learned a new term today, multiplex networks. So thank you for that. I had a question though, as a leader in an organization, how do you walk that fine line between building those very multiplex networks with team members, but also kind of having a barrier? You're not their therapist, you're not their support group, but you do care, and that helps to foster effective communication in the workplace. Can you talk a little about that fine line?
Yeah, that's such a great comment that you don't need to be everything to all people that you are leading. And like establishing those boundaries is really important. And there may be some things now, if somebody's going through a divorce, need to know all of the nitty gritty necessarily about what they're doing. But what what I would say is going to be like most impactful is setting your own boundaries. So, like, if somebody comes to you and they're like, I'm feeling suicidal, I'm not a therapist. So, how do I get them in contact with somebody that could really help them with that? Or, like, how can I be more of a facilitator of meeting their needs rather than feeling like I need to be one to meet their needs in all cases? Um, Also, it can be that they are going to be setting boundaries, and you're like, I want to have a closer relationship with my team member. And they're like, no, thanks. And having respect for that. It, not you don't have to be best friends with everybody. And it's not necessarily that you have to have a multiplex relationship with everybody. Some people just need to have a transactional relationship. Do this for me, I'll do this for you, and it's fine. So it's not about that you have to, but kind of going back to earlier in our conversation, thinking about like what are their needs, what are the needs of my team, and what do I feel is appropriate for me to do for them to meet those needs, and what kinds of other needs can I be a facilitator or an ally or a mini helper? Um, there's a researcher that I love, Adam Grant. He's a faculty at Wharton, and he talks about a 5 minute helper. He's like, I can be a 5 minute helper to anybody, but I don't need to be the solution everybody all the time. I don't have time. I don't have energy. I don't like. I'm not equipped to do that. But I can do anybody a 5 minute uh, favor. And as I develop my network of people, then I know more and more people who I can direct other people to. That's like, hey, I know a really great therapist that can help you dealing with issues of addiction, or I can this person can really help you with this problem that you're having, but it's not me. And maintaining those boundaries, and I mean you can't go through every single scenario of like this is what's appropriate, this is what's not appropriate. And I think different people have different lines of where they think that appropriate relationship is. But I think the biggest thing is about setting boundaries and having the other person's best interests at heart. I don't know if that answers the
Amazing.
question as
And
well.
and I'm likewise, I could stay forever and listen, but I do have to run. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thanks, Whitney.
Sydney, thanks for joining us.
Perfect.
That's awesome. Well, again, we're at time. We've got one other individual here, Angie. If you have any questions, Angie, welcome to raise your hand, or we can end the recording and the session. All right, I'm going to go ahead and end this recording. Thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate your time. Dr. Alt, always a pleasure to speak with you. If you'd like to hang out for just a minute, we'll have a little short conversation afterwards.
Sure. This has been great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate this. This is my jam. So
Yeah,
I'll talk about.
I forgot to ask, before we go, tell people how they can contact you, or if they can.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. You can send me an email. My email address is Michael Alt, AULT, the number one, at Weber, WER.edu. And just a few of like the pluggables. I'm the director of the Masters of Professional Communication at Weber State. So if you're interested in advancing your communication skills, you have a bachelor's degree, you want to move into more of a leadership role or something like that, please contact me. I'd be happy to talk to you about a master's degree. I do consulting with organizations. So if any of the stuff that we talked about is you're like, this is something that we need in our organization, then feel free to let me know. I'd be happy to work with you.
And look him up on LinkedIn. Any way that people can have a conversation with you, it's going to get better.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that endorsement.